The Citizen Mike Show. News. Commentary. Interviews. The Citizen Mike Show starts now.
Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Berdinsky. On my right is Ralph Tomaselli, the editor of the Record Journal, and a special guest in the studio tonight, Vinnie Cervoni, the chairman of the Wallingford Town Council. Vinnie, thanks for coming back on the Citizen Mike Show.
Thank you for having me.
We got a lot to unpack tonight, so let's get right down to it. We're doing a quick election postmortem.
Sure.
Get your impressions. I note that the turnout this past Tuesday was particularly heavy. These are rough numbers and they're rounded, but by way of comparison, in 2017, this last year, municipal election, about 10,500 people voted. In this election, about 19,500, about rounded. Huge. Vinnie Cervoni, is that turnout good? Will it repeat itself, and why do you think it happened?
I think that turnout is remarkable. Voter participation is something that I think we all consider important. I hope it continues. I think that this election was one of the most media charged that I've seen. I think there were more television ads than I've ever seen before in Connecticut. I can remember being in Florida in November, I want to say it was 6 years ago, and just feeling overwhelmed, the few times I was in the hotel room and turned on the television, being overwhelmed by the volume of TV ads, and thinking to myself back then, thank God we don't have this in Connecticut, and this year we had that.
Yeah.
And I think that we are all very stimulated by what's going on at the national level. And I think people showed up to react to what's going on at the national level.
Yeah. Is this going to repeat? High turnout? Not necessarily, those numbers, but, substantially more than we've seen.
Well, next cycle will be a local election, right?
Yeah, it'll be next year.
So unfortunately,
All right.
I don't think you'll see that level of participation, and that's really too bad.
Yeah.
Because as we talk about on this show, if you really want to influence things, get involved with the Board of Education or your town council.
Oh, we'll get to them in about
Yeah,
20
right.
minutes.
So,
Yeah.
but I don't think it'll repeat in a year. I do think it will repeat in 2 years.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out that, yes, I think those numbers were impressive and almost staggering, but leading up to it, we had all kinds of stories about additional registrations here in Connecticut, and then nationally, there were stories about the amount of early voting. Early voting was off the chart, so there were some signs leading up to the election that the turnout was going to be heavy.
Yeah, so Stefanowski did quite well in Wallingford, roughly 10,800 votes to Lamont's roughly 8,700 votes. It doesn't bode well for local Democrats in the upcoming election. It looks like Wallingford is a Republican town. That's a substantial lead for Stefanowski in Wallingford. Eventually, he went on to lose the statewide election. But Vinnie Cervoni, would you characterize Wallingford as a Republican-leaning Republican town, and Democrats sort of have the heavy lifting to sort of break into it?
The irony is that if you look at voter registration, when it comes to affiliation, the Democrats have the Republicans beat. But the unaffiliated have both parties beat. Or if you combine the Democrats and the Republicans as registered, they kind of equal the unaffiliated. And it does seem that the unaffiliated voters in Wallingford swing to the right.
Yeah. Three races I want to talk about briefly, get
Okay.
your impressions on those races. They're more of the local races. Trump will talk about in a little bit in the state election. We beat that to death in prior episodes. So this was the Mashinsky versus Don Crouch, the 85th Assembly District. Mary Mashinsky won 55, closer to 56% to Don Crouch's 44%. Ralph, I'm going to go to you first on this, 56 to 44. Is that a big win for Mary? Sort of what you'd expect?
I think it's
or closer than you'd expect.
It's
do you
what
think?
I would expect. And just to kind of parlay off that last discussion, I
Yeah.
mean, we talk about Wallingford maybe being a Republican town when it comes to voting for state or national office. I think Donald Trump just barely won Wallingford too a couple of years ago. But I think what Mary Mashinsky shows is that, sometimes in local elections, it's not so much about party affiliation. It's about Mary Mashinsky, someone who's well-known in the district, who's, kind of always around her district, a known quantity, someone people are comfortable with. And I don't necessarily think that her party affiliation makes or breaks her.
So, Vinny, to you next, but I'm going to frame it this way. I think a lot of people thought that Mary was going to win this. It was just a matter of how close Don Crouch could get. Maybe the Don Crouch people wouldn't like to hear that, but I think that's a realistic expectation, but I'm not sure you agree.
I have a hard time disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we like our incumbents in this town. Representative Mashinsky is pretty well entrenched. She's consistent. I know I can tell you she reaches out to me about issues that she thinks that in town government I think are important. She does make an effort to talk to her constituents. And I think Don Crouch had an uphill battle.
Yeah.
And in some respects, I mean, he's somebody that's been around the town committee probably longer than I have, or at least as long as I've been. Mm-hmm. And but otherwise, outside the town committee, not incredibly well known. And I think when you take that into consideration, I think he did pretty well.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. Let's move on to the state assembly district, the 90th, which is the Craig Fishbein versus Dan Fontaine contest. Yalesville, Cheshire, gerrymandered years ago to go all the way over to East Wallingford and all the way west over to Cheshire. It's amazing how gerrymandered that looks, that district. Nevertheless, Dan Fontaine got about 46.5% in rounded numbers. Craig Fishbein about 53.5%. Ralph, is it closer than you thought?
It is, but I have to, the only caveat being that
Yeah.
I should have gone back and looked at how he did in the last election. Did you happen to check that?
Well, the last one was Pat Reynolds.
Okay.
Is that versus
Right,
Craig
yeah,
Fishbein?
yeah.
I think Craig Fishbein's percentages were substantially higher.
Yeah, that
but
was my memory
that's
of it.
my memory, too.
So I will say it's closer than I expected.
And what does that tell you? Do you draw any reasonable inferences from that? Why? How did this happen?
Well,
How was the public going to look at this?
the only thing I can say is that his opponent from the outset made it a clear choice. In other words, that he was standing for things that Craig didn't, and vice versa. So it was a very, and I'm not saying the Pat Reynolds election wasn't, but I mean, Craig was calling his opponent a socialist. His opponent was making it clear that Craig's votes, not only on financial issues, but on what he termed social issues. So I think that the two of them really made it clear that this was a choice.
Okay, a compare and contrast.
A compare and contrast. Not two, Pat Reynolds and Craig Fishbein are two local, well-known guys.
Dan Fontaine, you mean?
Right. I'm sorry. No,
Yeah.
a couple of years ago.
Oh, a couple of years ago,
A couple
okay.
of years ago, you had more known quantities, two people involved in politics. I don't think I remember the differences being accented as much. In this race, with Craig calling him a socialist, I think that made it really clear that people had a choice here.
Vinny, your assessment of that race, did Craig Fishbeine's stock go up or down? Did Dan Fontaine's stock go up or down if he got closer than people expected? What's your view?
I didn't know who Dan Fontaine was until I ran into him at my polling district during the primary. I don't know where he came from. I don't mean that
No, I know what you mean.
facetiously, but what was he
No
doing
name
before?
recognition,
Yeah, what was
basically.
he doing before this?
Yeah.
And I think if I were Craig Fishbein, based on these numbers, I'd be concerned. I think that there was something that resonated with a relative unknown. I mean, to me, Fontaine is less known than Crouch, and he did better. And I'm not sure what the recipe was. Was it the mix of the district? Or what? And actually, let me just take a look.
Yeah, I think while you look at that, I think one consideration might be that Craig Fishbeine's negatives went up, either because of the campaign and how Dan Fontaine framed the issues, or just because of general exposure in town. But I think that has to be part of the explanation, that Craig Fishbeine's negatives went up. Also, Dan Fontaine, from what I understand, I had no direct connection with the campaign. His campaign had a lot of energy,
Yeah, I
a lot of action, and towards the end was active with mailers. So that has to account for some of it. Vinny?
Similar observation. I'll give you an example. Where I live, you don't get a lot of people a lot of candidates knocking on doors because the houses are far apart. It's not a good time bang for buck, but I know he was in my neighborhood twice. Saw the evidence of it.
That matters, right?
And to me, that's the volume of outreach that, of handshaking that he sought to do, of one-on-one conversations that he was looking for.
Yeah, so again, roughly 53 to 46%, 53 for Craig Fishbein. So let's go to the Len Fasano, Eiley McKean.
Just
Yeah, I'm sorry,
one
yeah.
other point about the
Sure, yeah.
and maybe I'm making too much of it, but you brought up Craig having a few more negatives, and I wondered when I first heard it if the use of that term socialist in a local election is particularly helpful to a candidate who's trying to attract.
So hold that
Good.
thought
Okay, let's hold that
for
thought.
the next segment,
Good.
because we're going to sort of get into
Okay,
that.
good.
But I don't want to forget
let's
about
go.
the Len Fasano, Eiley McKean
Yep.
contest. And here, a much bigger jurisdiction, roughly 41,000 votes cast for the senatorial candidates. Len Fasano from North Haven, but represents part of Wallingford, part of Durham, part of East Haven. He got about 58.5% to Eiley McKean's about 41.5%. So that's a healthier spread. It's well into double digits. And again, this is, I think, one of these contests where everyone expected Len Fasano to win. It'd been a huge upset if Eiley McKean was able to pull this off. It's just by how close Eiley could get. Vinny, what's your reaction to my assessment? Do you think that's close?
I think that's close. I would have thought based upon the volume of big signs I saw, certainly driving through North Haven or riding my bicycle through North Haven,
Yeah.
that she would have gained more traction, and she didn't even do as well as I thought she would have in Wallingford. Mm-hmm. The spread is not as big in Wallingford as compared to the other three towns, but she didn't gain the traction that I thought she might. And when I say that, I think a lot of what we see in numbers is influenced by what's going on at the national level.
Sure.
The Republican brand is not, for people who are on the fence about which side to sit on, the Republican brand is not inviting to centrists these days.
As we will also discuss in a few minutes. But Ralph, your thoughts on the Fasano-McKean?
The thing I would say is I think Len Fasano ran a campaign that didn't turn off Democrats or unaffiliated voters. I think he he ran a campaign that, in terms of tone, was trying to, I don't know, make the tent bigger. Is that the term that's used?
Sure.
And
I like that.
And I think he succeeded with that. He also did an excellent job on our show, and he did it. Len was one of the first state Republicans that I can remember who kind of rebuked some of President Trump's rhetoric, and I think mostly to do with on the DACA issue. So he was very early.
Create a little distance between himself
Creating a little
and
distance. And when he was on our show, I thought he handled the question pretty well and pretty heartfelt.
Maybe another show we'll
Yeah.
debate that. I didn't have quite the same assessment.
Okay.
I thought it was a little too much on the fence on that. But
All right.
let's change the topic just for a minute and talk about the tone and tenor and the level of toxicity in the campaigns, and if any of that national toxicity filtered down to the local level. There's been some buzz on social media about how us civilians or some civilians, non-candidates, don't like the negative advertising. We feel barraged by it, sometimes insulted by it, but maybe it works, and that's why candidates do it. There was a piece on the news, and within the last 10 days, one of the Republican organizations, it might have been the Trump organization, ran a national ad. It was a film clip, and it showed a Latino thug in custody with handcuffs on. And I believe this was allegedly, through an interpreter, and the narration says that he escaped into the United States. He illegally got into the United States twice, deported once, and then came back, killed 2 cops, and he said, I'm only sorry I couldn't have killed more cops. I don't know if you saw that video.
I did not.
It was deemed so racist that Fox News would not show it. Got it? I mean, how I explained it doesn't do it
Yeah,
justice.
no.
But if Fox News said no, I mean, it was bad. I think NBC ran it a little bit and then pulled it, and one of the other networks refused to run it. So President Trump had one of these running tarmac interviews, and a reporter says something like, President Trump, do you think that ad was too racist? And he says, it worked. Uh-huh. And then the discussion sort of went on from there. So that's sort of a segue into the next segment, which is a little more difficult. And what I wanted to do is to get some concrete examples of some local campaigning, get your views on whether the tone and tenor crosses a line or whether it doesn't. The tone and tenor of these political mailings crosses a line or whether it doesn't. If we non-candidates object to the negativity, at some point, negativity of mailings and ads, at some point we have to push back, and at least at the local level, the candidates are within reach. We can actually talk to them, and we have 2 years or 4 years to do it, depending upon the candidate. And maybe it should be said, some of those ads that you ran maybe didn't work, or some other coaching to reduce, at least on the local level, some of the toxicity. So we got 3 photos. Bruce, can you put up campaign 1, I think it's called. Put that up on the screen. That was a Craig Fishbein mailer. I picked this one out, and I think it came to me. Well, it shows it's a Photoshop, right? I mean, this is not a real. Dan Malloy really didn't pose
I'm not sure.
with Dan Fontaine. It's a Photoshop thing. That seems to be the
Yeah.
trend, to use Photoshop photos to draw an unfavorable comparison with your opponent. And of course, Dan Malloy, wasn't on the ballot, but that's, maybe that's fair comment. The reason why I picked this one out is the Photoshopping technique. Is that, let's take that one down, and I'm going to turn to Ralph first, and then Vinny. I kind of object to that Photoshopping as a way of, I don't think you need to do it. I think to me, it's just doesn't work. Doesn't work on me. Turns me off. Your thought?
Turns me off, and I'll just point out
Yeah.
that Liz Linehan protested a similar photo that was photoshopped, and one of her complaints was that the photo was just too touchy-feely, that it suggested more than just, I mean, and I know you could
Can you
argue.
describe what the image was?
Well, I think it was, well, can we
Similar?
put this image back up
Yeah,
there?
let's do that. Campaign 1, I think we
And
call
I
it.
had the same reaction to this. I mean, is that the way you hold somebody, that you're, that you're politically supporting? That looks like a hold
Well, I think
that looks like a more intimate.
I think the Fishbein campaign wanted to draw out an ick factor or something.
Yeah, it's
but
just,
but it's also
like I
just
said, and Liz Linehan complained. Part of her complaint was, and I understand some people, it's in the eye of the beholder, and
Yeah,
some people
all that.
will find me to maybe be overreacting, but it's kind of creepy.
All right. So, Vinny, your thoughts on that one?
You mean the father-son photo that was doctored?
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
that one.
Okay, that's right. It could be like a father. Yeah, good point. Yes, that it is like almost like a father-son.
Yeah, seriously? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I can only guess where that came from. I don't think I've seen anything like that in a local election in Wallingford, and I hope I never do.
Yeah.
There's nothing constructive about that. That's a negative form of pandering, and I really hope that never makes its way into a local race in Wallingford. I wish that I wish the state Republicans wouldn't support that kind of advertising.
And just another point too. I mean, there's just no, and we're going to get into this. What bothers me about these mailers is there's like no substance there. What's the point? Because they're both named Dan? I mean, whatever Craig
I guess.
thinks, or whatever Dan thinks about Craig, like, Dan Fontaine should be judged on Dan Fontaine's ideas, not the fact that,
Of course.
yeah, it's
Of
just,
course.
it's just,
Of
it's
course.
just
I mean,
totally,
that-
there's
that-
nothing there.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
You commented about Craig Fishbein calling Dan a socialist.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if Craig Fishbein
Right.
was here, maybe he'd say, hey,
He'd
that's
have,
fair.
oh no, he'd have, I know Craig
Yeah.
will have facts to back up the socialism phrase that he used. I just think it's a loaded word, and I don't,
And it doesn't work or it does work? Do you think it works?
it doesn't work for me.
Okay.
I think you can find more constructive ways. Like, if you think if that's the way you're headed because of their, the way they view finances or the budget or taxes or anything else, healthcare, be specific. I mean,
And for all the candidates that are tempted to use those epithets, two can play the game if you want to sink that low. So
Yes.
just be careful. If you dish it out,
Right.
you got to be able to take it, because there's equally low responses that one could throw out there.
Right,
Yeah, but
and I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
one thing that works much better is
Yeah.
sometimes candidates promise more than they can deliver, and I've heard you say it to them. Well, yeah, but how are you going to pay for it?
yeah.
I think that's a much better way to approach
Yeah.
what he's trying to get at.
Campaign 2 slide. Let's see what that has to say. So this was a postcard sent out by the Eiley McKean campaign. And when as a career politician served long enough, when after 16 years they've got nothing to show for it, and then it refers to pension and health benefits for life. But let's get one thing clear. My understanding, and Vinny weigh in on this, if you've served in the legislature for 10 years, I think this is a statutory fringe benefit. You get it. It's part of the compensation package. And if the voters don't want to return someone to office term after term because they don't want them to get life insurance or a pension or something as part of the compensation package, they can vote them out. Yeah? Okay. So Mary Mashinsky has been in office much longer than Len Fasano. So this, I'm saying this crosses the line for me personally. I'm not speaking for you two guys, but because it seems to stoke a class resentment, which I object to. It's not on the merits. It's sort of an ad hominem personal attack that kind of bends the truth and just doesn't say he was entitled to it by law. I mean, this is just something that legislatures get. Vinnie Cervoni.
back when I was on the Charter Revision Commission in 2000, I think it was 8, I remember the discussion we had about term limits. And what I remember about that discussion is that there was a town resident, Bob Sheehan, who used to come to a lot of meetings. He passed away just a few years after that, but I remember during the discussion on the term limits, he came forward and he said, if you don't like the guy in office, vote the bum out. And the one thing that the Democrats should be careful, you talk about, throwing punches below the belt. There were several terms where Senator Fasano ran unopposed.
Yeah.
So if you're going to complain about his longevity, then take responsibility for the fact that you didn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, again, if you want to be specific about Len Fasano's record, or even the fact that maybe he voted for pension and health benefits that he's receiving, I think that's fair game. But part of the problem with these ads is I always think that reasonable people in an election can agree and disagree and vehemently disagree with each other, but to insinuate that after 16 years, the only thing Len Fasano has accomplished is benefits for himself, well, that's not fair to say about anybody who's held elected office. Both of you have held elected office, and that's just not a fair way to characterize it.
Let's get that third one up, Bruce. See what that has to say. 38 years for Mary Mashinsky. So this is a Don Crouch campaign mailer calling Mary Mashinsky, who is a sweet lady. I mean, she's got a heart of gold,
Yeah,
very
no, that's a
polite
good
and
point.
very civil, calling her a swamp creature.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that is designed to, I don't think that's going to persuade many people. So when I saw that, I said, that's an example maybe of the toxicity that we should strive to avoid, and when we see local politicians doing it, push back. And so that's why we're doing this segment on the Citizen Mike Show. Vinnie Cervoni, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I don't enjoy that kind of theatricity, for lack of a better word, and I think I just made that one up.
Theatrics, I think. Yeah, right. I got you.
But if I could just step back to Senator Fasano, I think he was one of the few candidates that didn't respond with an attack postcard. To his credit, and I don't think I saw one from Representative Mashinsky either.
So there might have been other examples that I missed. There were actually many that I had that I could have put up, but I just selected these three because I think they illustrated the point. And I think as a consensus between the three of us, among the three of us, we hope we don't see we hope we don't see Wallingford politics degrading, further into sort of insult attack mailers. So.
But you will. I think you will, because as you and I talked about,
I know.
people want to win.
I know.
That's why they do things like this.
Speaking of which,
Ralph, I really hope you're wrong.
Yeah, so do I.
it's just, something I got to do. I'm just hardwired to talk about Trump from time to time. We've refrained from it for a lot of 2017 and 2016, but I wanted to get Vinnie Cervoni's view of this. Trump's Republican, Vinnie's a Republican. We've confronted other candidates and politicians on this show, local politicians. What do you think about Trump? We've had a variety of answers, but this is a piece in The Economist magazine. It's about 3 sentences longer than I want, but it's well put, so I just want to read it. Bear with me and then go to Vinnie Cervoni. Toxic federal politics is America's great weakness. It prevents action on pressing real issues from immigration to welfare. It erodes Americans' faith in their government and its institutions. And it dims the beacon of American democracy abroad. The midterm elections are a chance to begin stopping the rot and even to start the arduous task of putting it right. Mr. Trump did not begin this abasement, but he has embraced it as enthusiastically as anyone and carried it to new depths of his own devising. All politicians stretch the truth. Mr. Trump lies with abandon over 5,000 times since he was inaugurated, according to the Washington Post. His deceit is so brazen and effective that many of his supporters take his word above any of his critics, especially those in the media, and seemingly in the face of all the evidence. That suits Mr. Trump. I'm skipping it a little bit. Mr. Trump is also willfully divisive, and it goes on. So as I look at you, and we'll go to Vinnie Cervoni in a second, as I look at you, I say, gee, how could he be the enemy of the people? He's such a friendly guy on the Citizen Mike show, but there you are. Vinnie Cervoni, where do you stand on what Economist magazine? Do you repudiate Trump? Do you validate Trump, or do you try to sit on the fence and have it both ways?
In this day and age where we have anti-bullying initiatives all over schools, and this president seems to stand up and embrace the verbal bullying. You know, I mean, I think Senator Warren's little thing didn't go very well for her, but at the same time, he taunted her like a schoolyard bully. He reacted to last night's election results by firing Jeff Sessions, and I'm not sure I see the logic there. You know, in what I've heard in the media today is that they referred back to the repeated anger he had at Mr. Sessions because he recused himself on the Russia probe.
Yeah.
And I don't get the impression that he bothers to educate himself about things like that, about why a lawyer might recuse himself from a particular investigation. Maybe it's because he, as he reads the rules of ethics that govern what he does, that it's not appropriate for him not to recuse himself.
Yeah.
He'll tweet one thing and contradicts himself 12 hours later. I can't imagine how the Secret Service feels about a president who is constantly skipping all channels of communication to go directly to the public on Twitter. So we know he's got a cell phone in his hand all the time. I mean,
yeah.
You know, if you want to track somebody, a good way to track them is to figure out how to track their cell phone. And I'm not sure if I were in the Secret Service and it were my job to keep him safe, I'd be excited about the fact that his is always on and it's in his hand.
Let's have that be the last word on that topic, and we'll move on, because the next one is pretty important, and we're going to have to begin to watch our time now. So the Board of Education held a meeting on Monday to receive a report on school facilities. This was requested a while ago. There was an article in the Record Journal on, was it today or Tuesday? Today. Skipping down towards the bottom, it refers to the consultants, and consultants were the experts that the Board of Ed hired to help it review what to do with the issue of declining enrollment and a lot of buildings. So, picking up the end of the article, the consultants asked the school board to narrow down the 6 options. I think I'm getting ahead of myself. I hope I am. No, I'm not. Tell you what, I'm going to delay reading that for just a minute. So the meeting was at the town council chambers. It was pretty well attended. I think it had 150, maybe 200 people. I'm not really sure. I was there for about a half an hour. Then I decided to watch the rest on YouTube, especially because the report itself, although it could have been handed out to the board members several days in advance so they could read it and digest it and come to this meeting with some thoughtful questions or thoughtful concerns, there was a policy decision by Sal Menzo, the school administration, to withhold that report or to arrange the meeting in such a way that the board members got this report as they walked into the meeting. Same thing with the school community. It was put up on the school website the morning after the Board of Ed meeting. That was an option. That was a choice by Sal Menzo to keep from the public that information which they could have found useful in trying to follow the presentation. Well, at any event, the presentation droned along. I left, but they came up with 6 options ranging from, we're going to get into the specifics in a minute, up to $117 million, assuming the state reimburses 50% for school construction. And here I'm going to pick up reading this again. The consultants asked the school board to narrow the options down to 3, from 6 to 3. Remember, this is about an hour and a half meeting. The school board members get this report as they walk in. There's a presentation, of options on what to do, 1 high school, 2 high schools, all this kind of stuff. And then the consultants say, narrow it down for us tonight. But the school board wanted time to review the options. After some discussion, they did choose to eliminate the cheapest option, which is, I think, I'm going to get the exact numbers, like 17 million. Malone and McBroom, who was the principal planner, said the school's hesitancy in not narrowing down the 6 options to 3 or something would extend the project as sort of a threat. Well, if you delay tonight. But there was a reply by Erin Corso, who's a new member of the Board of Ed. She said, it's the first time we saw this information. So to make a decision on the spot, I think, was not ideal. We need to wrap our heads around all these different ideas and figure out what is best for our district moving forward. Vinnie Cervoni, you've got some information on this. Why don't you take it from here, and then I'll get a little more detail.
So having reviewed portions of the presentation, I can tell you that I'm overwhelmed.
Because?
Well, I think that the purpose of this analysis and report were to address declining enrollment and how do we most efficiently use our resources for our students in light of the declining enrollment. And at some point over the past 9 years of sitting where I am, I would have hoped that declining enrollment might have resulted in some savings in the budget. I mean, we had a Board of Ed budget that started, I think when I got on the council, it was just creeping into the $90 million range, and now it's at the $102 million range with declining enrollment. At what point does that result in some tax savings? And I understand that the primary cost in educating is the cost of teachers and staff and those very important elements of educating students. And I understand that those costs do go up. But if we have declining enrollment, at some point, is the staffing going to be reduced to reflect the declining enrollment? And to then look at this and say that we're going to most effectively address declining enrollment by spending somewhere between $59.1 and $117.2 million is just a bit shocking to me. And I say that because there's a $15.6 million option, and I understand before the end of that meeting, that was off the table.
Yeah, I mistakenly said 17 million, I was off by 400,000, a million four. Ralph, before we get to you, just a little background. This issue of 1 high school, remember that?
Right.
Because of declining enrollment, I thought the mayor was suggesting that maybe one day we can save money by having 1 high school. And then it hit the newspapers for a while, and the press played around it. I remember on this show, I said, don't take that seriously. I mean, come on. I think that maybe there was an inadvertent slip I don't know what was going on. And then lo and behold, this whole thing comes back. And what I mean by the whole thing, the Board of Ed decided to get a study done to explore the options, including going to 1 high school. And the consultants appear at this meeting with this 88-page report that have 6 options ranging from an as-is, just keep the buildings as we have, but do necessary repairs for $15.6 million. That's a substantial sum, but it was too low for the Board of Ed. So they took that off the table after like an hour and a half. No, we got to spend more than $15.6 million. And the other options range from, and again, this is the town's share, assuming roughly a 50% state reimbursement. Mm-hmm. So this isn't even the raw cost. So they go from 77.7 million, 117 million. The fourth option was 114 million. The fifth option was 100 million, 101 million. And then the sixth option, which is one of the 1 high school options, is $60 million. And that's not to mention the disruption during construction, because I think construction would go on during the school year, the transportation issues of maybe all the junior high kids going to the west side or the high schoolers going to the east side or vice versa, you know. It's a major decision, and it seemed as though the consultants and the Board of Ed and the school administration, Sal Menzo, expected sort of an adoption of sort of an assent to spend millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars after one meeting and knowing precious little about it. Okay, I'm done with my rant. Your thought?
I'm really glad that Erin Corso was the chair of this committee because, she obviously.
No, I'm not so sure about that.
Okay.
I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure there was any pushback at all. I'm not so sure.
Well, from her quote in the paper, it seemed like she.
Well, yeah, let me just take issue with
Yeah.
you. And I don't, the consultants, my interpretation of the reporting, with the consultants were trying to push the school board around and say, come to a decision. The school board sort of bought in to the idea that we're got to spend more than 16 million. After one meeting, we got to spend, and Aaron said, you know what? That's all we can do tonight. And I'm so go ahead.
Okay.
I'm just not sure anyone on the school board
Right.
is really pushing back at the outrageousness of this, the process. No one complained about getting the material late. No one moved to table it. They all seemed to sort of go with the flow and hear it out, and no one pointed their finger at the consultant as they should and say, seriously? 117 million? Seriously? Vinnie Cervoni, let me stop and give it to you before I go too far in my rant.
Well, I'm going to try to hold back.
Yeah.
Just because you don't want to rant anymore, it doesn't mean I have to. But
Yeah, right.
I looked at bonding, 77 million, and I'm being a little cynical because can we really count on state funding in the current state of the state? So there's a question in my mind. I mean, we're counting on that for now, but by the time this project gets put together, is that gift from the state still going to be on the table? So if you're bonding 77.6 million, 0.7 million, you're going to repay it over 30 years, and we have a good bond rating, so we're going to pay a 4% interest rate. The repayment on that is $4,445,000, almost $446,000 a year. You put that into the budget, and that's a mill. And for most people, that's a 3 to 4% tax increase that you get hit with the first year we start paying back those bonds, and you're stuck with for 30 years. That's a lot of money.
So I did some calculations too, came up with the same number with totally different assumptions, but it's interesting for comparison. Right. So I made the assumption that we go with the expensive option, 117 million, and I assume 20 years, you assume 30. So what? I mean, we're just playing around with numbers here. Interest rates are definitely going up. I assumed 3%, and I think maybe that's too low. But, I'm laying the assumptions out, and if they're flawed, well, of course, we've got to revise the numbers. I came up with the exact same number, 4.2 million a year, principal of and interest. Now, Ralph, I want to get you in on this, but my thought is, these aren't buildings that are falling down, right? I mean,
No.
So there's not a structural need. The original concept, as Vinnie Cervoni said, and I think as the mayor suggested 4 years ago, is to save money. And how do you save money by bonding 60 million, 70 million, 117 million? How do you save money? Therefore, there's another agenda, I think, in my opinion, going on that's driving this, and it is not savings. And the agenda may be so that Wallingford could brag about having the cutting-edge design of schools and maybe be in the front page somewhere and be a notch in, a line in someone's resume at the cost of Wallingford taxpayers. But I don't see a savings agenda at all reflected in the experts' report, and I'm pretty upset about that. Your thoughts?
Understandably so.
Take it away, because I don't want to rant anymore,
I
right?
think you both have made a good point, because when you look at the graphs that show declining enrollment, you would think at the very least that one way to pay for some of this would be through savings in other areas, but I don't think that's the argument they're making.
Vinnie Cervoni, you got the final word on this topic, and then we're going to try to squeeze in a little comment about the community pool.
I don't have the longest memory at this table. However, when I started on the council, it was the end of the school renovation series that wrapped up in 2010.
It began in 1999, I think. Rob.
Wow.
Remember?
Wow.
And the spending on that project was somewhere between 77 and 90 million dollars. So we've still got to be feeling some of that in terms of our debt repayment. You know, I can't believe that all of that was for naught.
Yeah. Well, I just hope the school board steps up. I didn't see any signs of it on Monday night, but I sure hope someone on that school board steps up, both as to process, so this idea doesn't get railroaded through. And I also don't see, well, yeah, I don't see it getting by the council and the mayor either.
I
But,
agree.
you know, things change, and I don't know. Bruce, I want to spend about 10 minutes on community pool, maybe a little bit less, so that's our
Okay.
time
Good.
limit on that. Community pool's been in the news for a while. There was a report on what to do about it. It needs a lot of repairs, needs a lot of work, it's getting old. Pool tag sales are down, so the revenue is slipping. There's a revised report, I think September of this year, in front of the town council. There was reporting on that, that the report was well received. Vinnie, you were quoted in that story. Take it from here. What's the status of the community pool plan? Where do you think it's going, and where do you stand on it?
I wish you talked about this before we talked about the schools, because
Yeah.
it seems difficult to get excited about a $6 million project after we're talking about $77 million for schools.
Yeah.
You know, the sentiment from the council after that presentation was across the board supportive. I mean, I think Tom Laffin and I probably gave the only cautionary words. I want to know a little bit more about how people feel about it before we really dive into it.
Well, there was some
To use a
survey, but
bad-
it never got off the ground.
Yeah,
There was a plan for a survey. How do people feel about it? That's just what I meant to say.
Yeah.
But no survey ever was done, right?
Right now, yes. Right now, we're just hearing the loudest people in the room, the ones who show up. There's and I feel badly that I don't remember her name, but there's
Okay.
a woman in the community who's organized a Facebook page and a support group, and notably, pool tag sales were up this year, and I think there's a relationship between.
Let's
the two.
assume, because we want to get an opinion out of you tonight, let's assume a lot of people would like to see this done. You will never get reliable numbers, but a lot of people want it done. Just like a lot of people like the senior center, the library, a lot of people like, park and rec programs. It's a niche amenity. A lot of people like the linear trail. Not everybody. There was no survey on that. It was just a town asset. Interest groups were behind it to push, develop, and maintain those amenities that I just listed. So now you got community pool.
Have you seen the proposed project?
Yeah, I have.
It is Club Wally. It's a beautiful proposed facility.
Very nice. The only thing that's missing are palm trees.
I don't disagree, and I'm sure that someone will bring one in. But what we have a town of about 45,000 people by the last census.
Yep.
Our pool tag sales for the past year were in the 2,500 range.
Okay.
2,600. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I want some sense that before we go and spend,
So
and
you're not
I'm saying $6 million.
Yeah.
Before we go and spend $6 million, that I want to know that people feel that this is an appropriate use of our money for the number of people who are going to use it.
So you're not a yes vote yet. You've had 2 meetings, 2 big reports, subject of discussion, all over town, in the social media, in the newspaper, but you're not a yes vote.
At the same time, I'm not a hard no.
But you're not well,
I'm wanting to be sold.
so I'm going to give you my view, and then we're going to have to sign
Go ahead.
off. But I want your view as
Give me your view. I can do it pretty quick.
Yeah, we ought to do this. We ought to bond it. We ought to make sure that the management policies are better than they are now. We got to make sure that pool tags are easy to get and convenient to get. We got to make a decision as to whether or not non-residents can come. We got to make sure that the hours are nailed down. We can't have a brand-new pool and have the mayor or John Gawlik said, oh, we're closing August 12, right before the heat wave. We got to work all that out. But under those circumstances, we can work it out, do the pool, bond it, keep your fingers crossed that people like it. And if people don't respond by coming, it was an experiment gone wrong. You go, and then Vinny's got the
and
last
I
word,
think
then we're going to sign off.
I pretty much agree with your take on it, and I
Yep.
think there's a good chance it'll happen. One, the mayor didn't shoot it down right away. The mayor at least was receptive to it. He didn't do his doom and gloom thing. Chris Shortell, who's not exactly known as someone who's a free spender, was very excited about it. Our own Steve Knight, who writes for the Record Journal, again, not somebody who's like a free spender.
Well, what do you think?
Right, okay.
Well, yeah.
Well, I think the town can certainly afford to put $3 or $4 million into a community
No,
pool.
the number is. could be
Well,
4
I
to
don't
6.
know.
Well,
I think Vinnie Cervoni makes a good point that we should look at the 4.5 to 6 million. I'm not saying that I wouldn't go for that, but I certainly think that we can replace a pool for $4 million.
Vinny, you got the final word.
You brought up out-of-town tags.
Yeah,
and,
I
and
did.
I'm not opposed to that. I think if you want to come to Wallingford and play at our Club Wally, you should pay a little more if you don't live here.
Oh, sure,
Your tax
absolutely.
dollars aren't subsidizing it.
Yeah.
You know what? If you tell me the numbers will work, I'll feel better about it.
I don't know where that leaves us. You know, you're cutting it down to 4 million. You're kind of on the fence. Thanks for coming on the show. We have
Thanks
run out of time. We
thanks for
appreciate it. We
having
got
me.
to do this again soon. Thanks, viewers, you for watching the Citizen Mike Show. You can catch a show on WPAA TV Thursdays and Fridays, Monday, Tuesdays, Wednesdays at 9, and that's why we used to say if it's 9 at night, it's Citizen Mike. But now the show's up on YouTube. You can get that by searching the Citizen Mike Wallingford channel or getting a hold of me through WPAA. I can send you an email link that goes right to the YouTube, the YouTube link. Good night, everyone. Thanks, Vinny Cervoni, for coming on the show. We appreciate it, and thank you.